I'm now going to switch to talking about IAM roles and bucket policies and how these things can interact. And you'll notice here I have one bucket that says error. And I'm really happy that error is there, and I'll explain that in a minute. I want that to say error. So let's switch back over to our shells. I want to take a look at what IAM role I have on these different resources. So here I'm hitting the metadata service of EC2. I'm in an EC2 instance. My EC2 instance has permissions based on its IAM role, and I am now checking to see what is in, this is the metadata service IP address. I'm looking at the latest metadata for my security credentials, and I see enumerated here, there is an IAM role called S3 read write. So now I want to go into S3 read write, and I want to get the actual access credentials, so I can do that quite easily here if I can copy and paste properly. So here I'm going to go all the way into that S3 read write. I'm going to keep going, and now I've got an access key and a secret access key. So now I've got some creds. Okay. And you very often will read about and very often see in the news, somebody finds some credentials like this. In this case, they're in an IAM role, which is really the best place to do this, by the way. The metadata service is really safe if used properly and is a much better place to get creds. AWS will automatically rotate them for you. You don't have to do secrets management. And if you remember what I said a few minutes ago, a lot of times these exploits happen because a set of credentials like an access key and a secret are stuck somewhere in code or in some directory of a disk, and bad guys find those things later, and maybe if you're not doing rotation, years later, they might still work. Okay, so before we move on though, I want to show you that both of these hosts, so I've got 10.0.0.39, here is the local IP, and here I've got 10.0.3.87. Both of these hosts, they're in different subnets, right? One is in the 3 dot, one's in zeros, all zeros, 10 zeros. And they have the same actual IAM role. And I just want to show you that. Okay, both S3 read write. They have the same level of permissions. Now, let's say this is a legitimate host, and this is a bad guy who has gone and found these creds and wants to use them, okay? I can do AWS, the AWS command line, and I'm just gonna list my S3 buckets. All right, let's do that over here as well. All right, same ones. I have the same view of the world. Now I'm gonna spend a little more time on the legitimate host. I'm gonna do an AWS S3 list, and I'm gonna do it for the customer records bucket. Okay, so I have some pictures here. That's good. This is the bucket that said error in the console. It's working fine. I can get access to these. I have S3 read write permissions. Actually, what I have, I'll show you briefly in the IAM management console. This is the list of permissions for S3. I would generally recommend never selecting this, all actions. I would recommend narrowing those. In particular, the list commands are really dangerous. The list commands allow bad actors to discover what's in that cloud environment, and that is one of the hardest parts of stealing, is knowing the landscape. So I would, the discovery kinds of, a lot of folks think, well, lists, that's not scary. Well, yeah, it is scary. Now I have all these object names, right? So if this S3 read write IAM role did not have the list command, I would not be able to get that enumeration. I would have to figure out what was in there some other way, and that's significantly harder. Now imagine that I'm actually a bad guy who's on this host, and I want to steal all of that data. It's a single command called sync. And let's say I want to steal all that data and put it in my all your base. I've just stolen all your data. I've stolen all your data, and it has not traversed any of the places you might be looking for data flows. So this is just a few images. This could be 1 million customer records or whatever. I'm not going to see that going across any kind of network inspection device anywhere because it's an S3 to S3 copy. Okay. Now, there is a way to really limit blast radius of these kinds of IAM exploits. So if you assume the bad guy has those credentials, let's try to do the same thing. I just showed you that this environment is exactly the same as this one, except they're in different subnets. In terms of their IAM privileges, their access, they could do the listing of buckets. But let's try over here. Oh, I want S3 first. Same exact S3 permissions from my IAM role. Remember, there are multiple layers. There's ACLs, there are bucket policies, and there are IAM roles and policies. So we're now, that third one is identical between these two, but I actually put a bucket policy on that on that S3 bucket that really narrows who, even with a legitimate IAM policy, can access the objects in that bucket. So the scenario here is I only want those EC2 instances or Lambdas or whatever that are resident in particular parts of networks, that in particular parts of my infrastructure, to have this ability with that IAM role. So that if that IAM role gets into other people's hands, they can't steal my data from across the planet. They have to be working from inside that infrastructure. So I'm going to show you briefly, and I did a very restrictive one here, which is why the AWS console itself actually does not have permissions to look at this bucket. Right? Access denied to the AWS console. So this is a very restrictive access policy. I would argue in a lot of cases, that's not a bad idea, by the way. So here we're saying, this is a bucket policy. We've got a deny statement. The deny is for everyone, all principals. That means anything that can act. The action is S3 anything. So it is denying all S3 activities, that whole list that I showed you here, all of these things. It's denying all of those unless, it's denying all of them for two things. This is important. The bucket itself, customer records, and then all the objects in the bucket. Okay, and this is being applied at the bucket level. It doesn't matter how I get to this bucket. I'm going to confront this policy, and that deny is going to be an absolute. And if you think about all the IAM roles you have out there, do you really know which of them could be used in potentially harmful ways against your S3? You would have to survey every single IAM role, which by the way you should do. And that's another thing we actually can help you with our product, but you should be doing that. But I'm more paranoid than that. I want to know that nobody can get into this unless they are coming from the correct place. And so here I've got two conditions. A string not like, and we're double negativing here, right? It's a deny policy, says string not like, and I've put in here a source VPC endpoint. Put another way, deny everything unless that request comes from this endpoint in this CIDR block. Okay, so over here, you can see right here, I'm 10.0.0.39. I am coming through that VPC endpoint, by the way, and I'm in the correct subnet. Over here, I'm actually coming through the same VPC endpoint, but just through a different subnet, so I get access denied. Now, where this becomes really important is when you think about the number of attacks out there that rely on stolen credentials and leaked credentials, This really limits the blast radius. Now, this is a sort of extreme example. You could be a little more liberal, but it is, if you have really sensitive data, I would strongly consider doing this. Now, that will not protect you against a bad guy getting inside of that subnet, getting that IAM permissions, and doing these operations from there. What I just showed you here, this could have been an external, you know, I've now done this in all your base, so we can go back over here and take a look, and I should have all those files in here. To reload. Yeah, so here we go. So now I've got these files. So that shows you a few different ways to think about S3 vulnerabilities and misconfigurations. I would say that one of the most complex parts is to think about is the relationship between the entire set of IAM roles that are available in your infrastructure with all of the buckets and objects available. So to recap a little, if anything's glowing orange public, make sure everything in there should be public. Anything that says objects can be public, you are potentially at risk with anything in there, and you should go look for those. Definitely use, wherever possible, the public blocks, because the public access blocks override everything else, and that's why they're there, is to make this a little easier on you.